A legendary sword was stuck in a rocky reef, and legend said only the one chosen by destiny could pull it free. Arthur reached out and grabbed the hilt with one hand, only to feel a jolt of pain like a lightning strike. Shocked, he let go fast, the captain beside him growing frustrated. If you can't pull it out, get lost. Still unsure, Arthur wrapped both index fingers around the hilt. Something miraculous started happening. The blade began glowing white, and the ground shook beneath them. Arthur pulled with all his strength, and the sword slid free from the stone. The captain froze for a second, then shouted for his men to grab Arthur. But before they could move, Arthur collapsed, crushed by the sword's power. When he woke up, he was locked in a dungeon. From his uncle Vladimir, Arthur finally learned the truth about his lineage. He hadn't even processed it. Before being dragged to the execution platform, Vladimir wanted to make his death a public spectacle, to tighten his grip on power. But just as the axe was about to fall, a witch in the distance cast a spell, sending a hawk into the square, and throwing the crowd into chaos. Hidden allies rushed forward, rescuing Arthur. In the confusion, they jumped off a cliff to escape pursuit, and took him to a mountain cave. There, Arthur learned these men were loyalists of King Uther, his father. They'd been waiting for Arthur to return and overthrow Vordigern's brutal rule. But Arthur didn't see himself as a savior. He was just a street thug, not a king. He refused to accept his fate. With no other choice, the men forced him to grip the sword again. As soon as he did, his eyes flashed white, and his mind flooded with long-buried memories. He saw himself handing the sword to his father. When he opened his palm, the mark from the sword was still there, telling him his fear was keeping him from facing his past. To turn him into a true king, they threw him into the Darklands, a forsaken island, filled with savage beasts and deadly predators. There Arthur fought venomous snakes in the grass, battled panthers in the streams, and barely survived an encounter with giant bats in the caves. After enduring hellish trials, Arthur picked up the sword again. More fragmented memories came back, but he still couldn't control the sword's power. Bruised and beaten, he made his way back to camp, only to learn Vordigern had killed his friend, burned his home, and hurt innocent people just to lure him out. Rage took over Arthur. He vowed to assassinate Vordigern and get revenge. Arthur and the old loyalists snuck into the city, planning to shoot Vordigern from 100 yards as he left the palace for negotiations. But something felt wrong. It was all too smooth. Arthur looked again. The man in the distance was a decoy. Vordigern had seen the plan coming and laid a trap. The signal was given. Soldiers swarmed in and quickly surrounded the courtyard. Black armored troops smashed through the gates. Arthur and his companions fought desperately, but they were outmatched and on the brink of being wiped out. In a moment of desperation, Arthur gripped the sword tight. A fierce wind whipped around him, sand and stone flying, and the world seemed to slow down. In the storm's eye, Arthur swung the blade. His power was overwhelming, cutting through armor like paper. The soldiers fell one after another. His allies stood in awe. This was the sword's true power. With what was left of his forces, Arthur broke through the siege and escaped back to camp. That night, sitting on the edge of his bed, haunted by the image of his foster mother's throat being slit and his friends dying in battle, he blamed the sword for everything. He climbed a cliff and threw the blade into the lake. Then he ran into the forest, trying to outrun the pain until he collapsed in a swamp, only to be grabbed by a hand that dragged him under. It was the Lady of the Lake. In her other hand, she held the flaming sword. She showed Arthur a vision of the future, a city in ruins, people slaughtered. If he kept rejecting his destiny, the only way to stop it was to take up the sword and face Vordigern in a final battle.